Well, what do we have here?" The voice dripped with a slimy, unearned confidence. It belonged to a petty officer second class, Miller, who was leaning back in his plastic chair so far it threatened to snap. He had a crooked smile and eyes that roamed with a predatory laziness. His partner, a seaman named Garcia, was glued to his phone, but he snickered in agreement without even looking up. Catherine Hayes stood before them, her hands clutching the handles of a heavy cooler bag. The early morning San Diego sun was just beginning to burn through the marine layer, casting a soft, hazy light over the main gate of Naval Amphibious Base Coronado. She felt the cool ocean breeze on her face, a stark contrast to the heat rising in her chest. She had rehearsed this moment. She was just another mom. A proud, slightly nervous Navy mom visiting her son during a rare family day weekend in the middle of his Buddy S training. She wore a simple, elegant linen dress, a wide-brimmed sun hat, and comfortable sandals. Nothing to draw attention, nothing to suggest who she really was. "Good morning," she said, her voice calm and pleasant, betraying none of her rising irritation. "I'm here to see Seaman Apprentice Sam Hayes. He's with Class 362. Miller's eyes did another slow, insulting crawl from her sandals up to her face, lingering for a moment too long on her chest. "Sam Hayes," Miller drawled, finally letting his chair slam back onto 4 legs. He made a show of looking through a clipboard, though it was obvious he wasn't really reading anything. "Class 362, Hell Week survivors. Tough kid, I guess." He looked up, that smirk plastered back on his face. "Must have gotten his looks from you. He sure as hell ain't that pretty." Garcia finally looked up from his phone, his eyes widening in a theatrical display of appreciation. "Whoa, Petty Officer Miller, for real? Ma'am, are you sure you're his mom? You look more like his older sister, a hot older sister." Catherine's smile tightened. The cooler, filled with her son's favorite brisket, smoked for 14 hours, and homemade macaroni and cheese, suddenly felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. For 25 years, she had worn the uniform of the United States Navy. She had commanded warships, planned strategic operations in the Pentagon, and earned the respect of warriors and statesmen. She had endured hardship and loss with a discipline forged in fire. But this casual, grubby disrespect from 2 sailors who weren't fit to scrape the barnacles off one of her former ships, this was a unique kind of test. "I can assure you, I am his mother," she said, her voice losing a fraction of its warmth. "Could you please just process my visitor pass? I have his information right here." She held out her driver's license and the official base access request form, already filled out. Miller ignored it. He stood up and ambled over, deliberately invading her personal space. He smelled of cheap cologne and stale coffee. "Look," he said, lowering his voice conspiratorially, "I'll level with you. Life for a Buddy S candidate is tough, really tough. Instructors are always looking for a reason to drop someone." He paused for effect. "A phone call from the right person, a bad word put in here, or there can make a guy's life a living hell. Make him wish he'd never even heard of the Navy SEALs." Catherine stared at him, her mind going cold and clear. This wasn't just unprofessionalism, this was a shakedown. A pathetic, grubby little power play at the gates of one of the most elite military training facilities in the world. The rage that had been simmering in her chest was now a block of ice. "I'm not sure I understand what you're implying, Petty Officer," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. "Oh, I think you do," Miller grinned, his confidence swelling. "We look out for the guys here. And we appreciate it when their families show their appreciation for us. A little something to make our day go by smoother, and we make sure Sam's day goes by smoother. It's a win-win." Garcia chimed in, emboldened by his partner. "Yeah, like, maybe you could buy us lunch at the Trident Room. Or, hey," his eyes lit up with a foul idea, "maybe you could give me your number. We could all hang out after our shift. I could show you the real Coronado." Catherine felt a profound, soul-deep weariness. It was a feeling that went beyond anger. It was disappointment. She had dedicated her entire adult life to the ideals of this institution: honor, courage, commitment. And here, at the very threshold of where those ideals were supposed to be forged into men of steel, was this rot. But she couldn't react, not as herself. Any move she made as herself would bring a hurricane of unintended consequences down on her son. Sam's journey through Buddy S had to be his and his alone. She had sworn it. So, she swallowed the bile in her throat. She forced the muscles in her face to relax. She would play their game, just long enough to get through that gate and see her boy. "I see," she said, her voice a carefully constructed mask of maternal concern. "Of course, I wouldn't want Sam to have any unnecessary trouble." What exactly did you have in mind?" Miller's smirk widened into a triumphant leer. He thought he had won. He had no idea he had just declared war on a force of nature he couldn't possibly comprehend. He was a jackal, taunting a sleeping lioness, completely oblivious to the fact that she was wide awake and watching his every move. The alarm had gone off at 03:00, but Catherine was already awake. It was a habit ingrained from years of early morning watches on the bridge of a destroyer, a silent discipline that had never left her. In the pre-dawn stillness of her Coronado home, a beautiful Spanish-style house with a view of the bay, she moved with a quiet, efficient grace. The house was immaculate, organized with a precision that hinted at her true nature. But this morning, the kitchen was a place of controlled chaos, a zone of loving creation. For a woman who spent her weekdays orchestrating the movements of naval assets across the entire Pacific theater, her focus now was singular and absolute: brisket, Sam's favorite. A recipe perfected over years, a taste of home she knew he was desperately craving after months of bland, high-calorie meals in the base galley. The smoker on her back patio had been running at a steady 225 degrees all night. The aroma of hickory smoke and slow-cooked beef was a comforting blanket in the cool, salty air. As she prepared the side dishes, a creamy, baked macaroni and cheese with a sharp cheddar crust, a tangy coleslaw, and sweet cornbread muffins, her mind drifted. She thought of her husband, David, a Navy fighter pilot, callsign Maverick long before it was a movie trope, with a smile that could light up a room and eyes the color of the deep ocean. He had been killed during a training exercise over the Fallon Range when Sam was just 6 years old. A freak mechanical failure, a life extinguished in a flash of fire and falling metal. After his death, the Navy had become both her sanctuary and her cross to bear. It was the institution that had taken her husband, but it was also the only family she had left. She poured all her grief, all her love, all her formidable intelligence and will into her career. She climbed the ranks with astonishing speed, her reputation for tactical brilliance and unwavering integrity preceding her. But every promotion, every star pinned to her collar, felt hollow without David to share it with. Her only true north was Sam. She had tried to give him a normal life, a life away from the rigid structure and constant sacrifice of the military, but the sea was in his blood. On his 18th birthday, he had sat her down in this very kitchen and told her he wanted to join the Navy. Not just the Navy, he had said, he wanted to be a SEAL. He wanted to be like the men his father had flown air cover for, the quiet professionals who operated in the shadows. A part of her had wanted to scream, to forbid it, to use all her power and influence to keep him safe. But she saw the same fire in his eyes that she had seen in David's. It was a calling. And she knew, with the certainty of a mother's heart, that to deny him this path would be to break his spirit. So she had made a deal with herself. She would support him, but she would never interfere. His journey would be his own. His failures and his triumphs would be earned by his own sweat and blood. That was why no one at NAB Coronado knew that the quiet, unassuming seaman apprentice Sam Hayes, who was currently being pushed to the absolute limits of human endurance, was the son of Rear Admiral Catherine Hayes, the deputy commander of the U.S. Pacific Fleet. To Sam, she was just Mom, a retired Navy logistics officer who now did consulting work for the Department of Defense. It was a carefully crafted lie, a lie of omission, designed to protect him from the crushing weight of her rank. She didn't want him to receive special treatment, nor did she want him to be targeted by instructors trying to prove they couldn't be intimidated by a 2-star admiral's son. Just right, she whispered to herself, pulling the finished brisket from the smoker. The bark was dark and perfect, the meat jiggling with rendered fat. She wrapped it tightly in butcher paper and placed it reverently into the cooler. She added the rest of the food, along with a dozen bottles of his favorite root beer and a bag of homemade chocolate chip cookies. It was an arsenal of love, a care package of maternal affection. She showered and dressed, choosing her outfit with care. The linen dress was from a small boutique in town. It was tasteful, but anonymous. Her hat shielded her face, and her sunglasses would hide her eyesight that too many senior officers would recognize instantly. She checked her reflection. A middle-aged woman, her face showing the fine lines of stress and sleepless nights, but her posture was straight, her chin high. Today, she wasn't Admiral Hayes, she was Sam's mom, and she couldn't wait to see her son. The drive to the base was short. She drove her unassuming sedan, not the black staff car with the 2-star flag plate that usually sat in her garage. As she pulled up to the main gate, she saw the line of other families, their cars filled with food and balloons and excited siblings. A wave of pure, simple joy washed over her. She was one of them. For today, she was just a normal mother. And then she had pulled up to the checkpoint, rolled down her window, and Petty Officer Miller had opened his mouth. The illusion of normalcy shattered into a million pieces. The situation at the gate was deteriorating with sickening speed. Miller, puffed up with his perceived authority, was enjoying himself far too much. He had waved through 3 other cars while making Catherine wait, each wave accompanied by a knowing wink in her direction. It was a deliberate, petty display of power. "So," Miller said, picking at something in his teeth as he leaned against the guard shack. "We were talking about appreciation for all the hard work we do keeping this base safe. You know, from threats," he gestured vaguely at the peaceful Coronado landscape, "you never know." Catherine's training, her years of high-stakes negotiation and command presence were screaming at her. A cold, detached part of her brain was already analyzing Miller and Garcia. Their sloppy uniforms, their undisciplined posture, their lazy speech patterns. They were emblematic of a failure in leadership, a breakdown in the non-commissioned officer chain that was the very backbone of the armed forces. An instructor at the Naval War College would have used this as a case study. But the mother in her was overriding the admiral. Sam was just on the other side of this gate. He was probably waiting, wondering where she was. The thought of him suffering even 1 extra second of hardship because of these decretins was unbearable. "I understand you work hard," she said, her voice strained but polite. "I'd be happy to buy you both lunch. Just tell me what you'd like from the galley, and I can arrange to have it paid for." Miller laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "The galley, ma'am, you wound me. We were thinking something a little more upscale. You look like you appreciate the finer things. There's that steakhouse downtown, on Orange Avenue. I bet they have a nice lunch special." He looked at Garcia, who nodded eagerly. "But I need to sign in," Catherine protested, gesturing again with her visitor pass. "The family day activities start soon." "Oh, the paperwork can wait." Miller waved a dismissive hand. "First things first, let's make sure we're all on the same page. Bet we have an understanding." He stepped closer again, his voice dropping to a greasy whisper. "We wouldn't want Sam's file to get a little note in it, would we? Something about a bad attitude, not being a team player. Things like that can get a man rolled back. Or worse, dropped from the course entirely, all that hard work gone." It was a direct threat, a clear and unambiguous abuse of his position. The line had been crossed. Catherine felt the ice in her veins begin to crack. The admiral was stirring, a deep and powerful anger that she had learned to control with immense effort over the years. It was the same anger she felt when she saw injustice, when she saw a subordinate being mistreated, when the honor of the service she loved was being tarnished. "Petty officer," she said, and this time, the steel in her voice was unmistakable. It was quiet, but it cut through the air like a razor. "You are very close to making a career-ending mistake. I suggest you take my pass, sign me in, and we can all forget this conversation ever happened." For a flicker of a second, Miller hesitated. Something in her tone, a sudden shift in her presence, gave him pause. It was the instinctive fear a prey animal feels when it realizes the harmless creature it was toying with is, in fact, a predator. But his ego, his arrogance, was too inflated. He misread her warning as a bluff. He chuckled, trying to regain his footing. "Feisty, I like that. Look, lady, you don't seem to get it. I'm the one in charge here. I have the stamp." He held up a red ink stamper from his desk. "This little stamp says whether you get in or not, and right now, I'm not feeling it." He reached for her visitor form, which was still sitting on the counter. But instead of picking up the paper, his fingers deliberately brushed against hers. The touch was clammy and repulsive. Catherine recoiled, as if she'd been burned. "Don't touch me," she hissed, the words coming out as a low growl. The public facade was gone. The polite, smiling mom had vanished. In her place was something else, Something cold and hard and infinitely more dangerous. The shift was so sudden, so total, that even Garcia looked up from his phone, a flicker of unease on his face. Miller, however, was too stupid or too arrogant to see it. He saw her anger as a victory. "Oh, sorry," he said, not sounding sorry at all. Just a little slip. He leaned in, his foul breath washing over her. "So, about that phone number." And that was it. The final thread of her patience snapped. She was no longer thinking about Sam, or about protecting her identity. She was thinking about the uniform these men were disgracing. She was thinking about her late husband, David, and the honor he had died for. She was thinking about the oath she had sworn, to defend the Constitution and to bear true faith and allegiance. And that allegiance demanded action. She drew herself up to her full height. It wasn't a dramatic gesture, but the air around her seemed to crackle with sudden energy. Her face, which moments before had been a mask of strained politeness, was now a chiseled piece of granite. Her eyes, hidden behind her sunglasses, were now fixed on Miller with an intensity that could melt steel. She was about to speak. She was about to unleash a storm of righteous fury that would have stripped the paint from the guard shack. But just as she opened her mouth, a sharp, authoritative voice cut through the tension. "Miller, Garcia, what in the hell is going on here? Get your backsides in order." A Navy commander, his uniform crisp and his face set in a stern frown, was striding towards them from the direction of the base headquarters. He had the unmistakable air of a career officer who did not suffer fools gladly. On his chest, below a rack of ribbons, his name tag read Evans. Miller and Garcia scrambled to attention, their lazy slouch instantly replaced by a panicked, awkward stiffness. Garcia fumbled with his phone, trying to shove it into his pocket. "Nothing, sir. Just assisting this civilian with her base access," Miller stammered, his bravado evaporating like mist in the sun. Commander Evans came to a halt in front of the guard shack. His eyes swept over the Seneath to flustered sailors, the waiting woman whose posture radiated an almost palpable fury. He was the executive officer of the Naval Special Warfare Center, and he had a finely tuned sensor for trouble, and it was screaming right now. "Assisting," Evans repeated, his voice laced with skepticism. "It looked to me like you were harassing her. I've been watching you from my office window for the last 5 minutes." He turned his attention to Catherine, his expression softening into one of professional courtesy. "Ma'am, I apologize for my sailor's conduct. I am Commander Evans. Is there a problem here?" Catherine took a slow, deep breath, reining in the Admiral. She gave a slight nod. "They were being unhelpful, Commander." Evans's eyes narrowed at her choice of words. Unhelpful, it was a mild term, but coming from this woman, delivered with that icy control, it sounded like a damning indictment. He looked at her more closely, truly seeing her for the first time. There was something about her, an indefinable quality of command, of absolute self-possession, that seemed utterly out of place for a civilian visitor. He had seen that look before, but only in the most senior flag officers. A vague sense of recognition tickled at the back of his mind. "I see," he said slowly. "Petty Officer Miller, Seaman Garcia. You will report to my office at 1300 in your dress whites. Be prepared to explain exactly what unhelpful means." He turned back to Catherine. "Ma'am, allow me to handle this for you. Who are you here to see?" "Seaman Apprentice Sam Hayes, Class 362, she replied. As she spoke, she removed her sunglasses. And in that moment, Commander Evans's world tilted on its axis. He saw her eyes, clear, intelligent, and piercingly familiar. He had seen those eyes looking out from a photo on the wall of the Pentagon. He had seen them across a briefing table during a high-level PAC-filled conference. His mind raced, frantically connecting the dots. The bearing, the voice, the eyes, it couldn't be. Not here, not like this. His blood ran cold. "Ma'am," he began, his own voice now barely a whisper, a knot of dread tightening in his stomach. "Forgive me for asking, have we met before?" Catherine offered no reply. Instead, with a slow, deliberate movement that seemed to stretch time itself, she reached into her handbag. The rustling of the leather was the only sound in the suddenly silent air. Miller and Garcia watched, confused. Commander Evans watched, his heart pounding against his ribs in a frantic, panicked rhythm. She withdrew a small, leather-bound ID case. She flipped it open. The morning sun caught the glint of gold, too brilliant, silver stars, pinned above the official seal of the United States Navy. Below them, printed in stark, simple text, were the words, Catherine M. Hayes, Rear Admiral Upper Half, United States Navy. Time stopped, the sea breeze died, the distant shouts of Buddies instructors faded into nothingness. For Commander Evans, the universe shrank to the size of that small leather square. The two stars seemed to burn with the intensity of supernovas, searing an image of his own doom onto his retinas. Rear Admiral Hayes, the Iron Lady of Packfold, a living legend. A woman known for her strategic genius and her absolute intolerance for incompetence or dishonor. And his sailors, at his gate, under his command, had been trying to shake her down for a steak dinner and her phone number. A strangled sound escaped Evans's throat. It was half gasp, half sob. His body reacted before his brain could, snapping into the most rigid, desperate salute of his life. Admiral! The word exploded from him, a cannon shot of pure, unadulterated terror. Miller and Garcia stared, their mouths hanging open, their faces draining of all color. The word admiral didn't compute. It was an alien concept. The woman they had been mocking, threatening, and harassing was an admiral. A two-star admiral. It was impossible. It was a joke. It had to be. But the look on Commander Evans's face was no joke. It was the look of a man who had just seen a ghost and realized it was holding his execution order. On your faces, Evans ground out, his voice trembling with a mixture of rage and fear. Now, the spell broke. Miller and Garcia collapsed to the pavement as if their spines had been removed. They lay flat on their stomachs, their faces pressed into the hot asphalt, a babbling chorus of "Oh God, sir, I mean ma'am, we didn't know, we're so sorry" filling the air. The commotion had drawn the attention of the other families in line. They were staring, whispering, pointing. The entire front gate of NAB Coronado had become a stage for a drama of epic proportions. And then, through the crowd, a figure appeared, jogging towards the gate. A young man in a clean set of physical training gear, his face etched with confusion and concern. He had been told his mother was at the gate, and he had come running, expecting a warm hug. Instead, he found his mother standing like a statue of righteous fury, a commander saluting her as if his life depended on it, and two of the base's gate guards prostrating themselves on the ground before her. "Mom!" Sam Hayes called out, his voice filled with bewilderment. He skidded to a halt, his eyes wide as he took in the bizarre, impossible scene. "What's going on? What happened?" Catherine turned to face her son. The hard, icy mask of the Admiral dissolved in an instant, replaced by a look of profound love and deep, aching regret. She had wanted to protect him from this. She had wanted to be just his mom, but that was a luxury she no longer had. Sam looked from his mother to the terrified commander, then down at the groveling sailors. "Commander Evans, what is this? Why are you saluting my mom?" He looked back at Catherine, a dawning, terrifying question in his eyes. And what's an admiral? The question, so innocent and so utterly devastating, hung in the air. Catherine's carefully constructed world, the secret she had guarded for 2 decades to give her son a normal life, had just been detonated, right in the middle of his own personal crucible. The fallout was just beginning. Sam's question echoed in the silent space that had formed around them. Commander Evans, still holding his salute, looked as if he'd been turned to stone. Miller and Garcia were practically trying to melt into the asphalt. For Catherine, the chaotic scene faded into the background. All she could see was her son's face, a canvas of pure, uncomprehending shock. "Sam," she began, her voice softer than anyone present had ever heard it, "we need to talk, just not here." Commander Evans finally seemed to reboot. He dropped his salute, though his posture remained ramrod straight. "Admiral, my deepest apologies. We can use the base commander's office. Captain Wallace is on leave. It's secure and private. I will escort you immediately." His voice was a tight, controlled monotone, the voice of a man desperately trying to manage a catastrophe. "My car is right here." He gestured to a parked sedan, and for the first time, Catherine noticed the captain's eagle insignia on the license plate. She gave a curt nod. This spectacle needed to end, now. "Petty Officer Miller, Seaman Garcia," Evans barked, not even looking at them. "You will not move from that spot until the Master-at-Arms arrives to take you into custody. Do you understand me?" A muffled "Yes, sir," came from the pavement. Catherine walked toward Sam, reaching for the heavy cooler she had set down. Before she could touch it, Sam's hand shot out and took it from her. The weight of it, the familiar smell of her cooking that seeped from the lid, only seemed to add to his confusion. "Mom, what is happening?" he whispered as they walked towards the commander's car. His eyes were wide, darting from her face to the terrified officers they left in their wake. "They called you Admiral." That's like a general, right? A star." "2 stars, Sam," she said quietly, her voice heavy. Commander Evans held the rear door open for them. They slid into the back seat, the plush interior of the car feeling like an entirely different world from the sun-baked asphalt outside. As the door closed, sealing them in a cocoon of silence, the full weight of the moment descended. Sam just stared at her. He looked at her simple linen dress, her sun hat now sitting on her lap, the stray strands of hair that had escaped her neat bun. This was his mom. The mom who made him brisket, who helped him with his homework, who cried at his high school graduation. How could she also be that? "All this time," he said, his voice cracking with a mix of awe and betrayal. "You told me you were in logistics, a consultant." "It was complicated, Sam," she began, but the words felt hollow. "Complicated," he shot back, his voice rising. "Mom, my entire life you've been what? Lying to me." "Not lying, protecting you," she said, her own voice firming up. "I never wanted this for you. The pressure, the expectations. I wanted you to be your own man, to make your way on your own terms, especially here. Do you have any idea what would happen if the instructors knew you were my son? Every push-up, every run, every single evolution would be scrutinized. They would either go easy on you out of fear, or they would try to break you to prove a point. There would be no middle ground. Your success or failure had to be yours, Sam, only yours." Her explanation was logical. It was rational. It was what an admiral would say. But right now, he didn't want an admiral. He wanted his mom. He turned away, looking out the window as the familiar sights of the Basidi grinder, the barracks, the obstacle course where he had shed so much sweat and skin flashed by. It all looked different now, seen through this new, bewildering lens. The car pulled up in front of the main headquarters building for the Naval Special Warfare Center. As they came to a stop, Sam saw something that made his stomach clench. Lined up on the steps of the building was a reception committee. The base commander, Captain Wallace, clearly recalled from his leave, was front and center, his face pale and grim. He was flanked by every department head and senior enlisted leader on the base. As Catherine stepped out of the car, they all snapped to attention and rendered a salute in perfect, terrified unison. Sam got out of the car behind her, still holding the cooler. He felt 100 pairs of eyes on him. He recognized many of them, his own company commander, the senior chiefs who ran the training platoons. Men he feared and respected in equal measure, and they were all saluting his mother. Some of them glanced at him, their expressions a mixture of shock and disbelief. The word had clearly spread like wildfire. "Hayes, the quiet kid in class 362. His mom is the Iron Lady." He felt like he was going to be sick. Catherine returned the salute with a single, crisp motion. "Captain Wallace," she said, her voice once again all business, "this is a mess." "Admiral, there are no words," Wallace began, his voice strained. "I take full responsibility. The failure in discipline at my point of entry is unforgivable. We'll discuss it inside." "Captain," she cut him off. "For now, I need to speak with my son, alone." "Of course, Admiral, my office is yours." Captain Wallace led the way, practically walking backwards to escort her. Sam trailed behind them, feeling like a ghost. He walked through the halls of the building, where his fate was decided every single day, but now he was an outsider, a guest in his mother's world. They reached the captain's office, a large, wood-paneled room with flags, commendations, and a massive oak desk. "I'll have my aide bring coffee," Wallace offered. "That won't be necessary, Captain," Catherine said. "Please, give us the room." Wallace and Evans exchanged a look, then nodded and backed out of the office, closing the heavy door behind them. The silence they left was deafening. Catherine walked over to the large window that overlooked the bay. She stood there for a long moment, her back to him. "You know," she said, her voice soft again, "your father and I had our first date on a sailboat, right out there. He spent the whole time trying to impress me with his fancy sailing maneuvers. He almost capsized us twice. A small, sad smile touched her lips. He would have been so proud of you, Sam, so incredibly proud. She turned to face him. Her eyes were glistening with unshed tears. I'm sorry, Sam. I'm sorry you had to find out like this. In the worst possible way, I've made a terrible mistake. She gestured to the small conference table in the corner of the office. Come on, let's eat. I didn't spend all night cooking for this food to go to waste. Sam looked at her, at the formidable two-star admiral who was also the woman who had packed his lunches for school. The anger and betrayal he had felt began to recede, replaced by a deep, aching wave of emotion he couldn't name. He slowly walked over to the table and set down the cooler. As she opened the lid, the familiar, comforting smell of home filled the sterile, intimidating office. And in that moment, he felt a dam inside him break. The stress of Bud A.S., the exhaustion, the fear, and now this, it was all too much. A single tear traced a path down his cheek, and then another. He sat down heavily in a chair and buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent, racking sobs. Catherine moved instantly, her arms wrapping around him, pulling his head to her shoulder. She held him tightly, stroking his hair, murmuring comforting words, just as she had when he was a little boy who had scraped his knee. The stars on her collar were gone. The rank was gone. In the quiet sanctity of that borrowed office, she was just a mother, holding her son. The storm of Sam's tears eventually subsided, leaving a fragile calm in its wake. Catherine sat with him, her hand resting on his back, until his breathing evened out. The captain's office, once a symbol of immense authority and pressure, now felt like a small, quiet sanctuary. Feel better? She asked softly. He nodded, not trusting his voice. He wiped his eyes on the sleeve of his t-shirt, feeling embarrassed but also lighter. As if a massive weight he didn't even know he was carrying had been lifted. I'm sorry, he mumbled. It's just everything. I know, she said. You don't have to apologize. She stood up and began unpacking the food from the cooler with practiced efficiency, laying out paper plates and plastic forks on the polished mahogany table. The sight was surreal, a feast of home-cooked comfort food, spread out in the nerve center of the Navy's most demanding training command. Now eat. That's an order. She managed a small smile, and Sam found himself smiling back, a real smile, for the first time. He took a plate and loaded it with brisket, mac and cheese, and a huge slice of cornbread. The food was lukewarm now, but as he took the first bite, it was the most delicious thing he had ever tasted. It was more than food, it was a connection to a life he had almost forgotten, a life outside the relentless grind of boats, logs, and cold water. They ate in a comfortable silence for a few minutes, the only sounds the clinking of their plastic forks against paper plates. So, Sam said finally, his mouthful of brisket. Deputy Commander, Pacific Fleet, that's a big deal. Catherine nodded, dabbing her lips with a napkin. It has its moments. No kidding, Sam said, a note of awe in his voice. Does the president know who you are? She chuckled, a genuine, warm sound that filled the room. We've met. He's the boss, after all. She looked at him, her expression serious again. Sam, I want you to understand. The reason I kept this from you was never about a lack of trust, it was about love. I saw how much you wanted this, how determined you were to prove yourself. My shadow, it's a long one. I couldn't bear the thought of it eclipsing your own accomplishments. I get it, Mom. I really do now, he said, and he meant it, but it's still a lot to process. My mom is one of the most powerful people in the Navy, and I'm at the absolute bottom of the food chain. The bottom of the food chain is where every great leader starts, she said firmly. Don't ever forget that. The chiefs and officers you respect so much, they were all you, once. Scared, exhausted, and covered in sand. Rank doesn't make the person, Sam, character does. What you are doing out there, on that grinder, that is building character. What those two sailors did at the gate, that was a failure of character. That's the difference. He chewed on her words along with his food. They made sense. He looked at his mother, really looked at her, and for the first time, he saw not just the loving, caring woman who raised him, but the steely, brilliant leader she had to be. And he felt a surge of pride so immense it almost took his breath away. After they finished eating, Catherine neatly packed away the leftovers. Her movements were precise, efficient. The Admiral was beginning to re-emerge. All right, she said, her tone shifting back to one of command. I need to deal with the official fallout from this. But before I do, I need to know what you want. What I want? Sam asked, confused. Yes, this changes things, whether we like it or not. The word is out. Everyone on this base will know who you are by sunset. I can make one phone call and have you transferred. A different program, a different base. A fresh start where no one knows. No one would blame you. Sam thought about it for a long moment. He thought of the endless nights shivering in the cold surf, the burning in his muscles from carrying the log, the faces of the men who had quit, who hadn't been able to take it. He thought of the bonds he had forged with the men in his boat crew, a brotherhood of shared misery and grim determination. He could walk away. He had a legitimate excuse. No, he said, his voice clear and strong. I'm staying. I'm finishing this. I started it as Sam Hayes, and I'm going to finish it as Sam Hayes, not as Admiral Hayes' son. Catherine's face broke into a wide, proud smile. It was the answer she had hoped for, the one she knew in her heart he would give. Good man, she said simply. She stood up and walked to the office door, opening it. Captain Wallace and Commander Evans were standing in the hallway, looking like they were awaiting a verdict. Gentlemen, she said, her voice once again cool and authoritative. Come in, close the door. They entered the office, their eyes darting toward Sam, who remained seated at the table. They stood at attention before the massive desk. Catherine did not sit. She stood before them, a commanding presence that filled the room. First, she began, her voice devoid of emotion. Petty Officer Miller and Seaman Garcia will be subject to a captain's mast is not sufficient. They will be formally charged under the Uniform Code of Military Justice. Article 93, Cruelty and Maltreatment. Article 120, Indecent Conduct. Article 128, Assault. And Article 134, Conduct prejudicial to the good order and discipline. Their actions were not a simple mistake, they were a calculated abuse of authority and a stain upon the uniform. They will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. Is that clear, Captain? Crystal clear, Admiral, Wallace said, his voice grim. Second, Commander Evans. Evans flinched as if struck. Yes, Admiral. Your quick intervention prevented a worse situation, but the fact that this culture was allowed to fester at your main point of entry is a significant leadership failure. You will receive a formal letter of reprimand, which will be placed in your permanent record. She let that sink in, a career killer. However, she continued, you will also be tasked with leading a command-wide review of professional conduct and ethics. I want a full report on my desk in 60 days, outlining concrete steps you are taking to ensure that every single person who comes onto this base, civilian or military, is treated with dignity and respect. This is your chance to redeem this failure, Commander. Do not waste it. I will not, Admiral, Evans said, a flicker of gratitude in his eyes. He had been given a death sentence and then a chance at a resurrection. Finally, she turned her gaze to Captain Wallace. Captain, the ultimate responsibility is yours. No official punishment will be recorded. However, you and I both know that this incident will follow you. Your command is now under a microscope. I expect you to support Commander Evans's initiative completely. I expect this to become the model installation for professionalism in the Navy. If I hear of a single incident like this again, from anyone, we will be having a much more unpleasant conversation. You have my word, Admiral, Wallace said, his voice filled with sincere resolve. One last thing, Catherine said, her eyes flicking to her son. This is the most important. Seaman Apprentice Hayes is a Bud AS candidate. Nothing more, nothing less. He is to receive no special treatment, positive or negative. His instructors will push him to the same breaking point as every other man, and he will succeed or fail on his own merits. If I get so much as a whisper that he is being handled with kid gloves or being unfairly targeted, I will personally dismantle this command structure, piece by piece. Are we absolutely clear on that? Yes, Admiral, both men said in unison. Good, she said. Then my business here is concluded. She turned to Sam and gave him a quick, firm hug. I'll see you at graduation, she whispered. It wasn't a question, it was a statement of fact. She walked out of the office without a backward glance, the two officers trailing in her wake. Sam was left alone in the quiet room, the lingering smell of brisket and his mother's perfume hanging in the air. His world had been turned upside down. But as he looked out the window at the grinder, shimmering in the afternoon sun, he didn't feel fear. He felt a new, unfamiliar sense of purpose. He had a legacy to live up to. Not his mother's, but his own, and his journey was just beginning. Months later, the main gate at NAB Coronado was a different place. The guards stood straight, their uniforms immaculate. Every vehicle was greeted with a crisp salute and a welcome to the Naval Amphibious Base. How can I help you today? The change was so profound, it was almost jarring. The story of what had happened to Petty Officer Miller and Seaman Garcia, both of whom were now serving sentences in the Miramar brig after a swift court-martial, had become a legend on the base. A cautionary tale told in hushed tones, Commander Evans had thrown himself into his new duties with the zeal of a convert, and a new culture of professionalism was slowly but surely taking root. For Sam, life had become both harder and simpler. The secret was out, and there was no putting it back in the bottle. For the first few weeks, he was an object of intense curiosity. His classmates kept their distance, unsure how to act around him. The instructors, to their credit, honored the Admiral's command with terrifying precision. If anything, they seemed to push him even harder, their voices laced with an extra edge of steel whenever they screamed his name, as if to prove to him and to themselves that his mother's rank meant nothing on this hallowed ground. But Sam didn't complain. He just put his head down and did the work. He was the first one in the water and the last one out. He took the heaviest part of the log without being asked. He shared his rations with men who were struggling. Slowly, the whispers and the sideways glances stopped. They were replaced by a grudging respect. He wasn't the Admiral's son anymore. He was Hayes, a solid boat crew member, a man you could count on when the surf was pounding and your arms felt like they were about to fall off. He made it through the rest of the first phase. He made it through the second phase, dive phase, discovering a surprising calm in the dark, silent depths of the ocean. And now, he was in the third and final phase, land warfare. It was the home stretch. One evening, after a brutal day of patrolling exercises on San Clemente Island, he sat on his bunk, cleaning his rifle. When the mail was distributed, there was a letter for him. There was no return address, but he recognized the elegant, disciplined handwriting instantly. He opened it. Inside was not a letter, but a simple, folded piece of paper. On it, his mother had written a quote, one she had framed on her desk at the Pentagon. It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles, or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood. Who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again. Because there is no effort without error and shortcoming. But who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause? Who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly? Underneath the Theodore Roosevelt quote, she had written just 5 words. You are in the arena. Love, Mom. Sam folded the letter carefully and placed it in the pocket of his uniform, over his heart. He looked out the window of the barracks at the star-filled sky. The stars looked different to him now. They weren't just distant balls of gas, they were symbols of duty, of leadership, of a legacy he now carried. And he knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that 2 of those stars, the brightest ones, were watching over him. He finished cleaning his rifle, stood up, and looked at his reflection in the darkened window. He didn't see a boy anymore. He saw a man who had been tested, who had been pushed to the edge, and who had not broken. He thought of his father in the cockpit of his fighter jet, and his mother on the bridge of her warship. He was their son, and he would not fail. Today's story is a powerful reminder that true leadership isn't about the rank on your collar, but the character in your heart. It's about integrity, standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult, and the quiet sacrifices that military families make every single day. Admiral Hayes showed that a true leader protects their people, not with their power, but with their principles. What did you think of her decision? Was she too hard on the sailors, or did they get exactly what they deserved? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Your perspective is what makes this community so special. And if this story moved you, please take a moment to hit that like button. Share it with someone who appreciates tales of honor and courage, and most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more stories that matter. Every click helps us bring more content like this to you. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.